Imagine a sheet of water so still it looks black like a burned mirror. Cypress trunks rise out of it like stone pillars. Gray moss hangs silently from the branches. No wind, no voices, just the feeling that you have stepped into a place too old, too wide, and too quiet to believe it is harmless. That is what these swamps all have in common. They do not scare people with sudden shocks. They unsettle people with history buried under the mud, with legends that never really died, and with waterways that can take you far in but never promise to bring you back out. From Louisiana to Virginia, these are 12 swamps in America so eerie that even locals choose to stay away. Number 12, Barataria Preserve, Louisiana. Barataria Preserve is the kind of swamp that makes an old pirate treasure legend feel dangerously believable. For generations, people around coastal Louisiana have repeated the same uneasy idea. Jean Lafitte once used these waters to hide smuggled goods, and somewhere under the mud, under the reeds, under the shifting black water, part of that lost fortune may still be there. That is what makes Barataria linger in the mind. Not because it looks terrifying at first glance, but because its beauty feels like a cover. Near Marrero, just south of New Orleans, this preserve spreads across more than 26,000 acres of cypress swamp, marsh, bayous, and narrow canals. It does not feel like one swamp. It feels like a maze that keeps rearranging itself. In the early 1800s, Lafitte and his network used the Barataria region as a real smuggling base, moving contraband through tangled waterways, hiding cargo, and slipping past authorities through channels outsiders could barely track. That history matters because it means the swamp was not just nearby. It was useful. It was built almost perfectly for concealment. Then the story darkens. Around 1814 and 1815, Lafitte's operation was broken apart and he vanished from the area. But the rumors stayed. Gold, silver, hidden cargo, crates buried in mud or sunk into water too murky to search. In a place like Barataria, that does not sound impossible. The land shifts. The water hides everything. The mud does not return what it takes. That is where the folklore begins to feel less like fantasy and more like an extension of the landscape. Locals have long spoken of strange lights in the marsh at night, sounds with no visible source, and treasure hunters who entered convinced they would find something, only to leave empty-handed and deeply unsettled. Barataria does not frighten people because it looks cursed. It frightens people because it feels calm enough to trust, while carrying the quiet pressure of a place that may still be guarding what a pirate never meant the world to recover. Number 11. Dismal Swamp Canal, Virginia. Dismal Swamp Canal feels less like a canal and more like a wound cut straight through haunted ground. A narrow man-made strip of black water running for roughly 22 miles along the eastern edge of the Great Dismal Swamp, stretching from Deep Creek in Chesapeake, Virginia, down toward South Mills, North Carolina, as if someone forced a corridor through a landscape that never wanted to be opened. At first glance, it can seem almost still, even historic in a quiet and respectable way, part of the old Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway, a place boaters pass through without realizing how much weight the water is carrying. But that calm surface hides a darker truth. This canal was first imagined in the era of George Washington, then carved through swamp in the late 18th and early 19th centuries by enslaved labor. That fact changes everything. The silence here stops feeling peaceful. It starts feeling imposed. Every straight stretch of water begins to feel unnatural, as though the swamp was cut open by force and never fully closed again. And yet the darkness of this place does not come from one story alone. It comes from two stories moving against each other. On one side, the canal belongs to commerce, extraction, and control. On the other, the Great Dismal Swamp surrounding it became a refuge for self-emancipated people, maroon communities, native groups, and others trying to vanish from the reach of slavery and surveillance. That tension is what makes this place linger. It is both passage and border, both route and hiding place. The canal carried movement, but the swamp beside it offered disappearance. And once you feel that contrast, the whole landscape changes. The black water no longer looks empty. It looks watchful, as if this corridor has spent centuries holding the pressure of forced labor, desperate escape, and lives lived just out of sight. Dismal Swamp Canal is not memorable because it is merely dark. It is memorable because it feels like a place where oppression and freedom passed within feet of each other, and the swamp remembers both. Number 10. Green Swamp, Florida. Green Swamp is unsettling because it does not just hold water, it controls where Florida's water begins. Spread across roughly 560,000 acres in central Florida, between Tampa and Orlando, this vast plateau is often described as one of the state's great water sources, the place where rainfall gathers, sinks, spreads, and becomes the beginning of four major rivers: the Withlacoochee, the Ocklawaha, the Hillsborough, and the Peace. It is also known as the heart of the Floridan aquifer, which means this is not merely a swamp sitting on the land. It is part of the system that allows much of central Florida to breathe through water, and that is exactly why it feels so unnerving. Green Swamp does not behave like a place you can fully read from the surface. Because of Florida's karst foundation, the boundary between land, surface water, and groundwater feels dangerously thin here. Sinkholes, caverns, hidden channels, and direct connections between what lies above and what moves below create the sense that the ground itself is never entirely settled. That changes the fear. You are no longer just looking at dark water, you are standing over a landscape that seems to be moving in ways you cannot see. Then the scale deepens the tension. Green Swamp feeds rivers, stores floodwater, recharges the aquifer, and helps regulate water for a huge portion of the state, which is why Florida designated hundreds of thousands of acres here as an area of critical state concern back in 1974. A place does not receive that kind of protection because it is empty. It receives it because it is too important, too sensitive, and too powerful to neglect. And as if the water were not enough, the region is also known for one of Florida's most important black bear populations, a reminder that this is still animal territory in a way modern people rarely accept until they feel it around them. Green Swamp is not frightening because it is forgotten. It is frightening because it is essential, immense, and still wild enough to remind you that the systems keeping millions alive do not belong to us as much as we like to think. Number 9. Big Cypress Swamp, Florida. Big Cypress feels haunted by one terrifying fact. In this swamp, you are never the apex presence. North of the Everglades, spread across more than 729,000 acres of protected wilderness in South Florida, Big Cypress is the kind of place that immediately makes a person feel demoted. The landscape itself does that first. It is not just vast. It is ancient-looking, tangled, and strangely uneven, with some of the largest dwarf cypress forests in North America, and old/pine stands that make parts of the swamp feel stunted and towering at the same time, as if the land has been growing under its own private rules for centuries. But the deeper unease comes from what still moves through it. Big Cypress is one of the most important strongholds left for the Florida panther, one of the rarest big cats in the United States, with only a tiny wild population remaining in the state and a significant portion of them using this preserve. That changes the emotional temperature immediately. Now the dark water, the cypress domes, the hardwood hammocks, and the flooded trails no longer feel like scenery. They feel like territory. And that idea keeps tightening because the panther is not the only ancient force here. American alligators are part of the same world, hidden inside a wet, layered ecosystem so dense that visibility never feels complete. You are always looking through something, around something, or into something darker than it first appeared. Then Big Cypress adds another layer of tension by being beautiful enough to seem unreal. This is also the realm of the ghost orchid, another near-mythic symbol of the Florida swamp, fragile, rare, and elusive enough to make the entire preserve feel like a living secret. That is why Big Cypress stays with people. It looks like a lost wilderness, but it is actually essential freshwater country helping sustain the Everglades and the estuaries of Southwest Florida. So the fear here is not just about predators or isolation. It is the deeper realization that this place seems forgotten only because it has never agreed to belong to us in the first place. Number 8. Black River Swamp, North Carolina. Black River feels haunted by age itself. Not a monster, not a murder legend, not some famous ghost story pinned to one patch of water. What unsettles people here is the sickening realization that the swamp around them was already ancient, long before almost anything they call history had even begun. In southeastern North Carolina, the Black River winds for more than 60 miles through Sampson, Blyden, and Pender counties, carrying that dark tea-colored black water beneath the canopy like a slow-moving memory. And along it stands the place that makes the whole landscape feel almost unreal. Three Sister Swamp, where bald cypress trees rise with swollen bases, twisted trunks, and storm-shaped crowns, looking less like trees than survivors from another age, because that is exactly what they are. Some of the bald cypress here are the oldest known living trees in eastern North America, and one has been dated back to 605 BCE, more than 2,500 years old. Once that number enters the mind, the river changes. The black water no longer feels scenic, it feels watchful. The cypress no longer look beautiful in any ordinary sense. They look like witnesses. You begin to feel like the late arrival in a place that has been standing quietly through empires, wars, industries, and generations of human lives too brief to matter much here. That is what gives Black River its eerie power. It does not frighten by threatening you directly. It frightens by reducing you. But then the story turns again, and that ancient strength becomes something unexpectedly fragile. The Nature Conservancy has warned that the river basin faces pressure from agriculture, logging, and pollution, even as these same old-growth trees preserve a priceless climate record in their growth rings, storing evidence of environmental history across millennia. That twist is what makes Black River linger in the mind. This swamp feels almost untouchable, almost eternal, and yet it is not, which means the oldest presence in the landscape may not be the thing that vanishes first. We might be the ones who make it disappear. Number 7. Congaree Swamp, South Carolina. Congaree Swamp feels terrifying because it can turn a towering forest into a silent water maze almost overnight. Not a low, tangled swamp crouching in the dark, but a vast, old-growth bottomland hardwood forest near Columbia, South Carolina, rising in massive columns like a green cathedral built on floodwater. Some of the trees here are so enormous they belong to the ranks of champion trees, and the canopy stands so high above the forest floor that the place can feel majestic before it feels dangerous. But that is exactly where Congaree gets under the skin. It does not need a ghost story. It has a system. The park sits inside the floodplain of the Congaree and Wateree rivers, and floodwater pushes into this forest again and again, sometimes around 10 times a year. Nearly 80% of the park lies within that flood zone, which means trails can disappear, backcountry routes can vanish, and even parts of the boardwalk can be swallowed when the water rises. Then the forest changes character completely. The ground here is almost flat, yet inside that flatness are levees, sloughs, oxbow lakes, and hidden channels woven through the woods. So when the water comes in, direction starts to collapse. The reflections multiply. The tall trunks repeat themselves. The still surface gives no warning. And suddenly Congaree no longer feels like a forest you are walking through. It feels like a place quietly rearranging itself around you. Though it already be enough to make it eerie, but the twist is what makes it unforgettable. The same flooding that erases orientation is also what feeds this astonishing beauty, carrying sediment and nutrients into the floodplain, helping those giant trees grow, sustaining the entire cathedral-like scale of the place. Then in late spring, the swamp delivers one of the strangest spectacles in the South when synchronous fireflies begin flashing in eerie unison, which means the same landscape that can make you feel lost and exposed by day can become almost supernatural by night. Congaree lingers because it never chooses between wonder and unease. It lets both stand there together, knee-deep in still water. Number 6, Caddo Lake, Texas and Louisiana. Caddo Lake feels like the kind of place where people, towns, and even explanations go in and do not come back out the same. Straddling northeast Texas and northwest Louisiana, Caddo spreads across roughly 26,810 acres of channels. Bayous, sloughs, and drowned pathways, all threaded through bald cypress draped in Spanish moss. It does not look like the Texas most people imagine. It looks older than that, darker too. The paddling trails slip through the swamp like secret passages, and the deeper you picture them, the more the whole lake begins to feel less like open water and more like a maze designed to keep its own counsel. Then the stories start closing in. One old Caddo tradition held that the lake was born from an earthquake sent by the Great Spirit, a beginning grand enough to make the landscape feel mythic before you even reach the shoreline. But Caddo does not rely on legend alone. Ghost towns from the era of the Republic of Texas still cling to its edges like erased names. Reminders that whole communities once stood here and then faded from the map. Near Broad Lake, the steamboat Mitty Stevens burned in 1869, killing around 60 people even though land was painfully close. That detail lingers because it turns the lake from eerie to cruel. Distance collapses. Escape should feel possible. Somehow it is not, and the unease never fully left. Even now, Caddo remains a backwater swamp of shifting levels, hidden roots, alligators, and dark water serious enough that swimming in the swamp is not recommended. That warning says more than it seems to. It confirms what the place already suggests. This is not water made for surrender. Then comes the final twist. For all its haunted stillness, Caddo is also a wetland of international importance, recognized under Ramsar, yet vulnerable to a thoroughly modern threat in giant salvinia and other invasive plants that can choke access and smother the ecosystem itself. So Caddo Lake lingers for a deeper reason than folklore. It feels ancient, untouchable, almost beyond human reach. And yet what may suffocate it in the end is not a ghost from the past, but something living, spreading, and already here. Number 5. Atchafalaya Basin, Louisiana. Atchafalaya Basin feels terrifying because it is not just a swamp. It is a place built to take the force of half a continent. In south-central Louisiana, stretching from near Simisport down toward Morgan City and the Gulf, Atchafalaya spreads out like a broken world of bayous, backwater lakes, oxbow lakes, and Cypress Tupelo swamp. So vast it stops looking like a landscape and starts looking like water thinking for itself. This is not a still wetland, it is a floodway. A living corridor designed to absorb, carry, and survive some of the heaviest water movement in America. The scale alone is enough to unsettle people. The lower Atchafalaya Basin. Floodway covers roughly 833,000 acres, and the wider basin is often described as the largest river swamp and floodplain swamp in North America. But the real unease begins when you understand what that size is for. Atchafalaya carries around 30% of the flow of the Mississippi Red River system, and that flow comes from a drainage basin tied to about 41% of the continental United States. In major flood conditions, this region is meant to handle an astonishing volume of water. That changes the whole emotional shape of the swamp. The fear here is not about one monster hiding in the reeds. It is about a place whose job is to endure pressure so immense that the landscape itself can be rewritten by current, sediment, and flood. Then the story takes a darker turn because Atchafalaya has not only threatened human control, it has erased human presence. Bayou Cheney, once a real settlement inside the basin, declined after major flooding and hydrologic changes, and what remained was eventually buried beneath around 12 feet of mud and silt. That detail gives Atchafalaya its final weight. This is not just a swamp where people can get lost. It is a swamp with a documented history of swallowing a community so completely that the water moved on and the land forgot how to mention them. Number 4. Okefenokee Swamp, Georgia and Florida. Okefenokee is the kind of swamp where even the ground seems unsure whether it wants to hold you. The name itself carries the unease. It has long been associated with meanings like shaking water in a low place, and the more haunting phrase, land of the trembling earth, which immediately changes how you imagine every step. Stretching across southern Georgia and northern Florida, Okefenokee is the largest blackwater swamp in North America, a vast expanse of tea-dark water, open wet prairies, forested cypress swamps, and scattered pine islands that look like small pieces of safety floating in a world that never fully settles. At first, the place feels still, too still. The water lies flat and dark enough to mirror the sky, but that calm is deceptive because in parts of Okefenokee, the earth itself can tremble. Some of what appears to be solid ground is actually semi-floating peat, a surface that can quiver under pressure and make the landscape feel physically unreliable. That one detail is enough to turn the whole swamp strange. Now, the black water is not just dark, it is depth without reassurance. The islands are not just scenic, they are temporary feelings of relief. And then the next layer closes in. Okefenokee is also home to roughly 15,000 alligators, which means the fear here is never purely mythical. Something ancient is always sharing the water with you, but even that is not the deepest threat. Beneath the swamp lies peat deposits that can reach around 15 feet thick, storing the remains of vegetation built up over thousands of years. That is what gives Okefenokee its final, unsettling twist. The swamp is not only old enough to feel haunted, it is combustible from below. In dry conditions, the very ground can hold fire and smolder for months, as seen during the massive West Memes fire. So Okefenokee lingers in the mind for a reason deeper than folklore. It is a place where the water shakes, the earth breathes, and the oldest layer under your feet may be the one most willing to burn. Number 3. Manchac Swamp, Louisiana. Manchac Swamp is the kind of place where a curse feels more believable because a whole town really did disappear. Just west of New Orleans, between Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Maurepas, Manchac does not hide from people the way many swamps do. In fact, thousands cross it without meaning to. Interstate 55 cuts straight through, on a bridge nearly 23 miles long, a narrow ribbon of concrete hanging over a flat, dark world of flooded cypress and tupelo. You can pass over it in minutes, but the feeling of it stays longer than it should. The water looks still. The trees look half drowned. The horizon seems to refuse depth. Then the old story rises with it. Local tradition holds that Julia Brown, a folk healer who lived in the tiny settlement of Frenier, used to sing that one day she would die and take the town with her. It sounds like the kind of line people invent after the fact until the history arrives. On the day of her funeral in 1915, a devastating hurricane tore through the area. Frenier was destroyed. Storm surge reached deadly heights. Lives were lost. And suddenly the legend stopped feeling like folklore pinned to a swamp and started feeling like grief fused permanently to the landscape. That is what makes Manchac so effective as haunted ground. The cursed story survives because the disaster beneath it was real, but the swamp has one more turn left. For all its ghostly reputation, Manchac is also part of the larger Maurepas Swamp, a wetland system that has been quietly degrading for modern reasons, just as merciless as any legend. Cut off from the sediment and fresh water that once sustained it, the forest has been weakening for decades. Restoration is now underway to send water back in and try to save tens of thousands of acres. So Manchac lingers for two reasons at once. People remember the song, the storm, and the dead town below the legend. But beneath that older fear is a colder one. This haunted swamp is not only remembering a catastrophe, it is still living through one. Number 2. Honey Island Swamp, Louisiana. Honey Island Swamp is the kind of place where one creature has become so tied to the landscape that the swamp almost feels designed to keep its legend alive. East of Slidell and St. Tammany Parish, between the Pearl River and the West Pearl River, Honey Island stretches out as a long cypress tupelo swamp, often described as more than 27 miles long and about 7 miles across, a wet and shadowed corridor that seems to run on far longer than the eye expects. but what people remember most is not its shape. It is the Honey Island swamp monster, a figure so specific and so strangely well preserved in local memory that it refuses to fade into ordinary folklore. The descriptions are always vivid enough to feel almost inconvenient. Around 7 feet tall, covered in gray hair, huge yellow eyes, webbed feet, and a smell like rot. Then the story gets stranger. One version claims a circus train wreck early in the 20th century released chimpanzees into the wilderness, and somehow that detail fused with the swamp until the creature became less an animal rumor and more a regional shadow with a face. What keeps the legend alive is not that everyone believes it. It is that the swamp offers just enough friction against certainty. Harlan Ford claimed to see the creature, and plaster casts of the four-toed prints linked to the case still exist, strange enough that even LSU zoologists reportedly examined them in 1974. That is where Honey Island becomes unsettling, not because the evidence proves anything, but because it never quite collapses either. The possibility remains suspended just like the moss over the water, and the final twist makes the whole thing stronger. Honey Island is often described as one of the least altered river swamps in the United States, a mature second-growth forest that still feels deeply isolated, with almost no roads cutting through it, and access often limited to boat or foot. Which means the monster story survives for the same reason the swamp feels so eerie in the first place. This place is still wild enough that modern life has never fully explained it away. Number 1. Great Dismal Swamp, Virginia and North Carolina. Great Dismal Swamp feels like the kind of place people entered when they needed the world to stop seeing them. Straddling southeastern Virginia and northeastern North Carolina, it is not just a large swamp, but the greatest surviving piece of a wetland that once covered more than 1 million acres. A landscape so vast and difficult that for centuries it offered something more powerful than shelter. It offered disappearance. At its center lies Lake Drummond, the largest natural lake in Virginia, its tea-dark water stained by the deep peat beneath it, a reminder that even the calmest surface here was shaped by fire, decay, and time. But the real darkness of Great Dismal Swamp does not come from its color. It comes from what this place meant to human lives. From the 17th through the 19th centuries, people came into this swamp for radically different reasons, and that collision still gives it a terrible weight. Native people, free black communities, freedom seekers escaping slavery, and maroon settlements used the swamp as refuge, hiding deep enough to slip beyond the reach of the society, hunting or controlling them. At the same time, enslaved laborers were forced into the same landscape to cut timber, dig canals, and help turn the swamp into something useful for commerce. That is what makes this place feel heavier than an ordinary haunted landscape. It was both sanctuary and system of coercion at once, a place where some entered to resist capture while others were driven in by it. And once you understand that, the swamp changes. It no longer feels empty. It feels layered with absences, with lives deliberately hidden, erased, or forced into silence. Then comes the final turn. Today, this same swamp has become one of the Mid-Atlantic's most important ecological refuges, sheltering mammals, migratory birds, butterflies, and one of the East Coast's largest black bear populations. That twist is what makes Great Dismal Swamp unforgettable. A place once known for concealing human lives from a brutal world now protects some of the region's rarest forms of life, as if the land never stopped doing what it always did best, keeping the vulnerable out of sight. Some places do not need ghosts to feel haunted. They just need deep water, old silence, and a history that never fully sank. These swamps are unsettling because they remind us that nature does not always want to be understood, and some landscapes seem to keep secrets better than people ever could. So now I want to ask you this: which one disturbed you the most? And are there any swamps, bayous, or forgotten wetlands we should cover in the next video? Drop your pick in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey into America's darkest waters, subscribe and stay with us for the next one.